till November, because they won't let me schedule past the 9th. So I said, okay,
This is Brian. I'm testing 1, 2, 3. How is the sound working for you online? Tell me if you can hear it very well. I think the internet is struggling. I think it's not connecting well. I've already reset my phone and the computer, so blurry. It seems blurry. Can you hear me at least? If I'm blurry, that's probably a plus, but do I at least, can you hear everything I'm saying? No, if the sound's working good, then we'll be okay. Just so you people know, Terry, who's here in the building with me, says I'm blurry and don't sound good here either. So Well, I want to invite everyone to get your Bibles out. Let's go to Joshua chapter 3 tonight. Joshua chapter 3. We're going to go through chapters 3 and 4. Short enough that we can kind of read them together and go through them together. A few things that we're going to find that are interesting here as we're going to be crossing the Jordan River, as we're going to be a little bit of discussion about what monuments are effective and a little confusing sometimes to try to put all these things together. Before we get started, though, let's go to our Father in a word of prayer. Would you bow your heads and pray with me? Righteous and holy Heavenly Father, we come before you in prayer, and we give thanks to you for the blessing of the opportunity that we have, that we can gather together, Father, and we can study your word. We're so very grateful for your word and the message that is found here. And as we look to the life of Joshua and the events around his conquest of the land, we pray, Father, that it will strengthen us in our faith, that we too, who are fighting the good fight, might be faithful in all things. Ask your blessings upon the saints in the remainder of this week. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen. So let's go ahead and go over to Joshua chapter 3 and begin reading together here in Joshua chapter 3. I'll just go ahead and do the first portion, and then I'll drop it over to someone else. Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and they set out from Acacia Grove and came to the Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, and lodged there before they crossed over. So it was after 3 days that the officers went through the camp, and they commanded the people, saying, when you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests, the Levites, bearing it, then you shall set out from your place and go after it. Yet there shall be a space between you and it, about 2,000 cubits by measure. Do not come near it, that you may know the way by which you must go, for you have not passed this way before. Quick question here. Does anybody have a measurement different than the 2,000 cubits? Anybody actually say what the feet are? So, Rob?
Well, it says 2,000 cubits, but that's 3,000.
3,000 feet, yeah, because a cubit is roughly 18 inches. So 3,000 feet. So that's over half a mile distance that they were told to keep there. So that's kind of interesting. I don't think too many of us here, if Stan was here tonight, he could help us. I don't think anybody else here has been to Israel or seen the Jordan River. All the pictures I've ever seen of it, it looks about the size, water-wise, maybe a little more of the Tualatin, around here, just to say that's about the size of the pictures. But it might have been quite a bit bigger then. Of course, they weren't irrigating as much, so it's really kind of hard to say. And we're about to find out that this river is pretty substantial, because this is the time of year when it runs over its banks. So that really gives us a sense of what that's like as well. Can I have somebody read verses 5? Let's do 5 through 13. And 5 through 13. And then I'll have somebody else read the remainder. So can somebody go verses 5 through 13? Rob, please.
Then Joshua said to the people, consecrate yourselves for among you. And Joshua spoke to the priests, saying, Ark of the covenant, and cross over ahead of the people. So they took up the Ark of the covenant and went ahead of the people. Now the Lord said to Joshua, this day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you. You shall moreover command the priests who are carrying the Ark of the covenant, saying, when you come to the edge of the waters of the Jordan, you shall stand still in the Jordan. Then Joshua said to the sons of Israel, come here and hear the words of the Lord your God. Joshua said, by this you shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will assuredly dispossess from before you the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Hivite, the Perizzite, the Girgashite, and the Amorite, and the Jebusite. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is crossing over ahead of you into the Jordan. Now then, take for yourselves 12 men from the tribes of Israel, 1 man for each tribe. It shall come about when the soles of the feet of the priests who carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth, rest in the waters of the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan will be cut off, and the waters which are flowing down from above will stand in one heap.
And can I have somebody read the rest of the chapter 14 to the end? Go ahead, Anthony.
So it came about when the people set out for their tents to cross the Jordan, with the priests carrying the ark of the covenant before the people. And when those who carried the ark came into the Jordan, and the feet of the priests carrying the ark were dipped in the edge of the water, for Jordan overflowed over its length banks at the days of the harvest. That the waters which were flowing down from above stood and rose up on one heap, a great distance away at Al, the city that is beside Shittim, and those which were flowing down towards the sea of Arabah, the salt sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed opposite Jericho, and the priests who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all the Israel crossed on dry ground, until all the nation had finished crossing the Jordan.
A quick question, give you a Brian point if you know. The Jordan River has a unique characteristic of being what? What geographical characteristic makes it unique in the world? Anybody know? It is, Stephen?
Well, today it's the boundary between Jordan and Israel.
Actually, yeah, it is a boundary. You're right, it's country boundary. I wasn't thinking of that, Stephen, but that's it. George?
I'm thinking about it flows into the Dead Sea, which has no outlet.
Has no outlet, and it's the lowest sea in the world. So it's below sea level. So parts of the Jordan River are below sea level. It's kind of a strange thing to think about too, but that's a good point too about its political, its boundary today. And it represents, of course, the crossing into the promised land, although to some degree, for at least some of the people, they're already in their land that's been promised. So that's kind of a thing for us to consider as well. One of the things that I noticed here as we were going through the reading was that it's about 6 different times that it specifies that the ark was carried by the priests. Now, is that unusual? What does anybody think about that? Do you see anything unusual about that, Rob?
I don't know if it's unusual, but in earlier readings, there was a designated group of men
Yes.
to take care of the ark and all of its parts and everything else. And I don't know if they were
Kohathite
tribe
too.
or
Yeah.
not.
Yeah. So specifically, we're the group that were specified to carry it. There was a Levitical group that was specified to carry these things, but they weren't necessarily of the priesthood. So there's some question about this being something kind of unique. Now, I will admit that at one point it talks about the priests, the Levites, as one, but the rest of the time it's very specific to say it's the priests that are carrying the Ark of the Covenant, and that's not typically the way that the Ark was being carried just for its being moved. That might be something different. So that might point to us something kind of unusual going on here. Anybody have any thoughts about that or comment? Go ahead.
It's special because God is showing them that He is God and will be their God.
George, what would you say? I'm gonna put you on the spot. What would you say is special about, how does, maybe anybody can answer this, how does the ark demonstrate something special about what's going to happen here, or who's going first? Oh, go ahead. So how does the ark represent God?
Because His presence is there.
So the interesting thing is, we tabernacle, the presence of God was above it, and within the ark, the 3 things within the ark, the manna, I didn't hear what you said. The law, the 10 commandments, and the rod. Very good, very good. So we have those 3 things that are within that. And it's kind of a neat symbolism, all the blessings of God, the covenant, if you would, the characteristics of the covenant, they're all within that. So it's called the Ark of the Covenant. So it's kind of neat to see that all those things are symbolized there. And so it's kind of symbolic of God, as much as anything could be symbolic of His presence. So it leads off the way, and this is the way that they get a sense that God Himself is leading them. So it's a really powerful idea. Go ahead, Linda.
Led by the pillar of fire.
Yeah. So what's interesting? It's very different. So the Bible specifies in the book of Numbers that a cloud would get up or would move, and they would follow it when it moved. So that's what was leading them before. And now it's this sustained device that they're going forward with too. And again, I think that's kind of maybe symbolic of the idea of being led by the Word of God and things like that kind of fit our life too. So I do like to think of it that way. So it's an interesting reminder about that. So one of the other things that kind of came to my mind as I was looking at this is, it's such a neat story as far as what's going to happen, and lots of people like to point out, what would it have been like to be the priest? And here's this rushing river. Remember, it's overflowing banks, and you're the guy in charge. You're carrying it. You got to go first, and your foot's, and what happens? You put your foot down, and yeah, the water stops. So what are the priests going to do to keep the water stopped? They're going to stand there. Now, I was thinking about this. So they're going to stand still. They're going to go down there with the ark and stand still. How long do you think, he doesn't say, but how long do you think they're going to stand there? How many people are everybody? Yeah. I was thinking about this and I thought, this wasn't as though it was just a few hours. I know the Israelites crossed the Red Sea in a night, but that to me that seems like a much larger crossing area that they would have gone through. So I just don't know, but at least 12 hours, let's say. They're down there for a long time. Go ahead.
I got the idea that the priest stood there while the law was being read, and the comment was made. Everything Moses wrote was spoken while they were standing there.
Yeah, and what do you think about that? That's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of stuff to read too. So a very interesting point, Lamar.
In verse 16, there's a reference to the city called Adam.
Mm-hmm.
And the footnote says it's 15 miles from where they crossed that city. That's how long the water backed up. They reached that point.
I was wondering, Lamar, as I kind of considered some of the sense of this, and I even wondered if Adam, might have been somebody that said maybe a misnomer for Edom, but that's the wrong side, so it really didn't fit. But there's got to be a mathematical way to calculate, what it would be like for water to back up that far, how long that would take. But I've often wondered if I'm sitting in the city of Adam and all of a sudden the river starts coming up out of its banks at me, what would that feel like? What a shocking day for them too. So that was an interesting point. Rob?
Do you think it actually, when it backed up, that it actually flooded out, or that I kind of got the impression it just kind of stood up?
Yeah, what does it say there? It stands up as a heap, right? So do you think that means the idea that it just kind of went straight up?
More miraculous.
Well, it would be pretty miraculous. Yeah, it would be pretty extraordinary. It says like a heap several times. And so it's really interesting that it makes that specific statement. And I don't know what to make of that, Rob. I just can't imagine what to make of that. And I have no reason to doubt that it could have just stood straight up. Came right up out of the...
Did you get the idea that the water downstream continues flowing? Would you say to the point that the whole Jordan River was dry from there south?
So the waters that went down in the Sea of Arabah, the Salt Sea, which is the Dead Sea, failed. So I assumed it meant that it was dry all the way down, right? Yeah. So maybe if they're crossing, it might actually have been you could have crossed anywhere south of that point. Is that kind of what you're thinking, George?
Well, I was just thinking that it dry.
Yeah. Well, I guess that would be the other side. If you live downstream of that, you're thinking, what are those guys upstairs doing? That would be a pretty shocking feeling to have that going on. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Go ahead, Teresa.
Just a side note, this event has to have been very spectacular, not just to the Israelites, but to all those that witnessed it.
Yeah.
And of course, they were afraid because all these people were coming and they knew what the Lord had done for them.
Yeah, and you might have thought something, and I was wondering about this. If I lived in Jericho, I think, well, it'll take them a month or two at least to get across that river, and all of a sudden the river's gone, that something has happened and the river's gone. One of the next thing it's going to say in chapter 5, the first few verses, is it's going to say everybody, when they heard that the Lord had dried up the rivers, their heart melted. So I kind of was thinking about the idea that maybe that was the final straw of, there's just no hope for us. That river drying up like this was really something. In fact, kind of brings us to our next question. What does this miracle tell Israel? What is this going to get them to see? Yeah.
I guess it also shows that God is with Joshua. So that just like he did with Moses. So this is not another confirmation that the Israelites, here's your leader, and God confirms it, because God does miracles through Joshua.
I hadn't really thought about it too much, but that would be a significant point, wouldn't it? That with this moment happening, and by the way, when's the last time the water did something like this?
Yeah.
It was with Moses in the first time. So I really hadn't thought about that, but that does kind of make a nice, Joshua's, got that ability too, or Joshua's a leader like Moses too. That really would kind of have a weighty comparison to Moses. I really hadn't thought much about it, but that makes sense. Teresa?
It lets them know that God's capable of doing anything that he tells them he's going to do. And it doesn't really matter what, as long as they're doing what he tells them to do, he's capable of doing all things.
So Teresa's point that this demonstrates to them he's capable of doing all things. What is it that he's going to do that they have to trust him about? Yes. So basically the point here is Joshua says, by this you shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out before you the Canaanites, Hittites. Rob did a good job reading all those names, by the way. Canaanites, Hittites, Girgashites, Jebusites. He says, this is going to prove to you. And Root makes the statement, he says online, that this proves that God will be with them. They're going to win. And this is the sign of that they're going to win. So this is important, all the things that are going on. And it's going to make sense then that this is something here in just a few moments we're going to make a point that they're going to want to memorialize. They're going to want to make this something that they don't forget about anytime soon. We've got one more thought or question to think about here. What is it when we sing songs about the Jordan River? What are we usually singing about? Crossing the Jordan to go to heaven. So what is the Jordan River kind of symbolic for us of? Yeah, sometimes we use the Jordan River as symbolism of death. Well, my question is why? When we sing songs about here I stand on Jordan's stormy banks or things like that, what do we got, Teresa? Oh, I'm sorry, I thought your hand went up. Go ahead, Lamar.
Well, God had promised the land. He let them into the land just as he promised. He promised us that we go to heaven if we're faithful and do the things he's told us to do. So that metaphor works from that context of what he's promised.
So what's really interesting, so if you heard what Lamar said, okay, their promise was the promised land. Our promise is a heavenly home. In Hebrews 11, it talks about it being a heavenly land, that we're promised to inherit too. So if they have to cross the Jordan, we have to cross the Jordan. Well, there's a lot of great illusion here to think about for a moment. If you're going to have to cross this rushing river, what kind of things are going through your mind? You're probably afraid. I think that's probably a natural one for all of us. When we think about getting to our reward, we're probably a little afraid. That's not unusual. And yet, there's a great sense here of don't be afraid. This is a sign for them, but think about the fact it's also a sign for us of the promises God has yet to come and what it is that we have yet to receive. That God would want us to think, God's with us, and what he has in store for us is really great. It might be a little frightening, but at the same time, we have to cross that river to get to it. That's the way we get our reward. Go ahead, Monique.
I was also thinking too that as the Israelites needed God's intervention to get across that Jordan to their promised land, we needed God's intervention to get us across to our heavenly river.
So that's really neat, isn't it? That God had to intervene in order that they could cross over. Now, you're right, Monique, when you describe the idea that Jesus' death and burial and resurrection gives us the hope of the resurrection. Because he did that, because he went through that first, we have that hope of getting through that too. So you're right. I mean, it really is. Otherwise, death would be the end of it for us. But now that Christ has been resurrected, oh, death, where is your sting? Is the language of 1 Corinthians 15. Very good. Anybody else have a thought to bring to that? So as I said, that, you know, we sing a lot of these songs. We want to know why we use this illusion. Well, it's because this is the way that they got to their reward, and this is the way we get to our reward. Stephen reminds us online, he says, you know, be strong and courageous. I'm thinking of a song, and I'm also thinking that God kept telling Joshua back in chapter 1, that's what you've got to be to get through this and to receive your reward. You've got to trust me. And so that's, as I said, that's the lesson for us too. Let's go ahead and go up to the next chapter then. Picking up for chapter 4. And what I will have somebody do is, if we can have somebody read verses 1 through 7. Who's got verses 1 through 7? George, go ahead.
And it came to pass, when all the people had completely crossed over the Jordan, that the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, take for yourselves 12 men from the people, 1 man from every tribe, and command them, saying, take for yourselves 12 stones from here, out of the midst of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet stood firm. You shall carry them over with you and leave them in the lodging place where you lodge tonight. Then Joshua called the 12 men whom he had appointed from the children of Israel, 1 man from every tribe. And Joshua said to them, cross over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan. And each one of you take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, that this may be a sign among you when your children ask in time to come, what do these stones mean to you? Then you shall answer them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, when they crossed over Jordan, and the waters of the Jordan were cut off. And these stones shall be for a memorial to the children of Israel forever.
And can I now have somebody read verses 8 through 14? 8 through 14, please.
The children of Israel did so as Jehovah commanded. And took up 12 stones out of the midst of the Jordan, as Jehovah spake unto Joshua, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel. And they carried them over with them to the place where they lodged, and laid them down there. And Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests that bear the ark of the covenant stood. And they are there unto this day. For the priests that bear the ark stood in the midst of the Jordan, until everything was finished that Jehovah commanded Joshua to speak unto the people, according to all that Moses commanded. Joshua and the people hasted and passed over. And it came to pass, when the people were clean passed over, that the ark of Jehovah passed over, and the priests in the presence of the people. And the children of Reuben, and the children of Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh passed over, armed before the children of Israel. And Moses spake unto them. About 40,000 ready armed for war passed over before Jehovah unto battle to the point of Jericho. And on that day Jehovah magnified Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they feared him as they feared Moses all the days of his life.
So verses 15 to the end. Who's got that for me? 15 to the end. Stephen, please.
Now the Lord said to Joshua, command the priests who carry the ark of the testimony that they come up from the Jordan. So Joshua commanded the priests, saying, come up from the Jordan. It came about when the priests who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord had come up from the middle of the Jordan, and the soles of the priests' feet were lifted up to the dry ground, that the waters of Jordan returned to their place and went all over its banks as before. Now the people came up from Jordan on the 10th, the first month, and camped at Gilgal on the eastern edge of Jericho. Those 12 stones which they had taken from the Jordan, Joshua set up at Gilgal. He said to the sons of Israel, when your children ask their fathers in times to come, what these stones, and you shall inform them, your children, saying, Israel crossed this Jordan on dry ground. The Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before before you, and they would cross just as the Lord your God had done to the Red Sea, which he dried up, which the feet, so that you may return, so you may fear the Lord your God forever.
So, here's kind of a tricky question. Saw too, yeah. Kind of confusing a little at first, but that's what I counted too, and I thought it was kind of interesting. Go ahead, Rob.
Well, I was wondering, I even highlighted that part there,
Wow.
because this sounds like an expedition.
Yeah?
Because those ones you stacked up in the middle of the river that is now flowing over.
Yeah.
They had to be in some pattern, right? 'Cause he
Yeah,
said each,
okay.
You know, and they were big enough where you had to put them on your shoulder. So to this day, it says, you know.
Ready to go look for those rocks. Now, to be clear, to this day, probably was only about 3 or 4 centuries after at the most, but, you know. And Rob, my very thought was, well, maybe they're still there somewhere. That would be interesting. So that's, that it really is interesting. I want to talk about these memorials. First of all, so the first memorial that they're going to pick up the stones and take them into camp. And then where is that first memorial of the 12 stones that the people gathered? Where's that one going to be placed? Did somebody say it? Gilgal, yeah. So the first one is going to be placed at Gilgal. So that that's the one that they're going to set up, that he says here. And whenever they look at those 12 stones, what are the people supposed to? Oh, actually, let me save that question for just a few moments. So that's the first one. Now, then Joshua takes his memorial, and Rob, where did he put it?
Back in the middle of the
Right in the middle of the river, right where they were standing. You know, so what do you think? Maybe not symbolism, but why is that so interesting? What's the idea here? Let's say you live a couple of. Go ahead, Stephen.
I was just wondering who's ever going to see it.
Yeah, that's a kind of an interesting thing. Although in some way, maybe somebody could see it because they knew it was there to this day. Go ahead, Ron.
Well, in the flow of the water, if there's some kind of thing under there, that's going to change the flow of the water. It could make a little swirl there. It could be doing something.
And that river might drop quite a bit in the summer too, or whenever it's drier. So it's very possible it's visible. But the idea is somebody comes along and you know, I don't believe this really happened, but there's a pile of stones in the middle of a river underwater that might testify very much so that it really did happen. Teresa?
I was just gonna say, that's the spot where God drives the river for them to cross.
Yeah. So anytime somebody said, I'm not sure, well, let's go see the place it happened. You know, that's really pretty exciting. You know, if I were at all skeptical of, as an Israelite about this, you know, you could go to it and see right where it happened and see the pile of rocks that they put there in dry land, you know, to do that. That really is something spectacular. So the memorial stones that the 12 people, 12 members picked up, where did they take them at first? To their lodgings, into their tents, their camps. Why? What do you think that was about? It doesn't tell us why. But anybody have a thought about that? I was kind of curious about that. Go ahead, Stephen. What do you think?
Well, the text says that on the front of you, it says that no metal object shall come in contact with it. I got the impression that the reason for this was to keep it from being defiled by someone, an outsider, anyone who might decide for whatever reason. They just need to keep it protected because it was such a symbolic thing to this day.
Very interesting observation, Stephen. We know that the similar memorial that's described in Deuteronomy 27, as it says there, you know, no stone, not to be, you know, handled like by any metal tools. And that was interesting because it was the idea of being defiled by that. So that's an interesting thing. I hadn't thought of that, Stephen. That's a good point. Anybody else have a thought? Why might they have taken these into their...
Separate from Joshua's rocks.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point, to keep them separate from Joshua's rock. Where'd my rock go? Joshua took it. That's an interesting observation. I hadn't thought of that, yeah. And it might be that significant that was the idea. You know, I think of the idea of a rock like that. I mean, that'd be a really heavy rock, too. What do you think?
I was wondering from Deuteronomy 27 and the instructions that Moses had given to the elders of Israel, that, did that take anything to do with what he had said to do, code them with line and write the law?
So here's the thing, and this is where I get even more confused. I think that that's an even third memorial in Deuteronomy 27, but I think it's very possible it's meant to be the same thing, that they're supposed to be setting this up the same way as that memorial. So again, this idea of how they're going to be placing that, because that one's going to be placed on the mountain and this one's going to be placed at Gilgal, which are roughly the same place. So it's very possible they're not different, but they are the same. So, so I'm a little confused, but you're right. Now remind us one more time, what were they supposed to do with that, those stones?
They were supposed to coat them with lime and write the words of the law.
They were supposed to coat them, whitewash them, coat them with lime, and then write the words of the law on them. And that was the stones that Moses commanded them to pick up and take. George? Yeah, and it wasn't, I don't get the impression it was just the 10 Commandments. So what would that be like, you know? I can't imagine, you know, what that would be like. Very, very interesting idea. So very possible that's what they brought them in. I got a comment from Stan here that's good. Stan says, well, in this way, bringing it into your home, it became very personal. You know, it's that's kind of where I was thinking, is the idea you're bringing it at your home. You know, it's kind of special. It's not just any rock. You know, it's, I'm not gonna say pet rock, but you know, it's my special. It has some specialness to it. So it would become something significant. I think maybe that's some of it too. So anybody else ever thought about it? Like I said, there's no answer here specific. It's very interesting to think about this though. And maybe there was an answer and somebody, you know, had a better thought about this. So what did the memorial stones collected by the people signify? Not Joshua's memorial, but the memorial stones that the people gathered together. What does this signify? What does it say towards the end of chapter 4? So he says, you know, those stones, the ones that you're going to take out, and you're going to take them over to Gilgal. Here's what's going to happen. What are those about? George, go ahead.
It was to signify that they had crossed on dry land, so that their children asked them to come.
So, you know, here's the idea. They're going to symbolize you crossed on dry land. Now, what I think about is interesting about these two memorials is one is stones that might have been taken from the land and put into the middle of the river, and the other one is where the stones come from. Middle of the river, they were taken out and put it on the land. So I kind of see a neat switch of these two ideas of the memorial. But this memorial of the 12 stones, God says you're going to look at that and you're going to say, hey, remember, this is why we came out. This is that we came out through dry land to come to this place. So it really does seem something. Anybody think of any other altars created with 12 stones? What else do you remember? One of my favorite stories. Anybody? George?
When Reuben and Gad and Manasseh returned home.
Now, that's going to be very interesting. We're going to be covering one more memorial, a fourth memorial, at the end of the book of Joshua. How's that one going to go over, George? Do you know? Yeah, that last memorial nearly starts a war between all the tribes. And that's going to be really interesting when we get to that at the end of the book of Joshua. So very interesting that we'll have one more memorial. Anybody else think of any others? Very interesting. Go ahead. Elijah at Mount Carmel. Yeah. So again, it's kind of interesting, those 12 stone memorials, kind of a neat thing. It is interesting how this is. Oh, and Lisa Root's got a comment. She makes the observation that these stones came from the middle of the river. They wouldn't be like stones on land. That is a good point to say. What are river rocks like? Well, they're really smooth, In fact, one of the things I was thinking about is I was envisioning the idea if a river got stopped, you had to walk through it. I'd hate to have to, if the rocks or things like that, but those river rocks would be real smooth and they would look completely different. They would be something that you knew came out of a river. So I think it would be really interesting to see them like that. So that's a good point. Go ahead.
Another, maybe you could call it a memorial, were the 12 gemstones that were put on the priest.
That's right. That's right.
They had
tribes inscribed on them and that. So it was a sort of a memorial with 12 stones.
That exactly is right. I hadn't thought about that, but the breastplate had 12 stones for the 12 tribes that the high priests were. I didn't think of that, but they are described that way. You're right. That's a good one. Didn't think of that. What do you got?
Revelation as well, the 12 foundations.
I didn't even think of Revelation 21 or 22, 21, 22. Yeah, so I didn't even think about that, but the city with 12 foundations, yeah. I didn't even think about that. That's nice. That's a good one. Really good. So another question. There's 12 stones, but how many tribes? 13 tribes. So who didn't get a stone? We presume Levi. Why not? What do you think? Why doesn't Levi get a stone? Go ahead, George.
They didn't get a section of land.
They didn't even get land. And George, I actually think that's why. Because the stones are land, and the Levites aren't getting land, so to speak. They're not going to be a part of that. So that was one of the big ideas that popped out at me. Anybody else have a thought about that? Go ahead, Monique.
I thought that, because God was their inheritance.
That's right. Yeah, so specifically he says that about the land. So again, I think the Levites, you could say, are a living memorial themselves of God giving them that crossing too. So that's kind of a neat thing as well. Your other things you could point out is say, well, the Levites crossed it a very different way. They're the one that had to go in first, and so that's significant. And I got a comment here. So Stan was wondering about the other tribes. I think might have been confused about why we're assuming the Levites didn't pick up a stone. But just with 12 tribes, we assumed that the Levites were the ones without a stone. Go ahead, Lamar. Oh, sorry. So then the next question was about that monument in Deuteronomy chapter 27. So Deuteronomy chapter 27, we have a memorial built there. Let's turn over there really quickly. We have a little bit of time, so let me just read this for you. As Moses was, now Moses with the elders of Israel commanded the people, saying, keep all the commandments which I command you today. It shall be on the day when you cross over the Jordan to the land which the Lord your God is giving you, that you shall set up for yourselves large stones and whitewash them with lime. So first of all, this fits nicely to the memorial that they were building for Joshua. So on one hand, it does sound like this could be the very thing. And that might make sense why they're taking those stones in. That's one of the observations we had, taking them in your home, that you were going to be doing this. You shall write on them all the words of this law when you have crossed over, that you may enter the land which the Lord your God is giving you. A land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord of your fathers promised you. Therefore it shall be, when you have crossed over the Jordan, that on Mount Ebal you shall set these stones, which I command you today, and you shall whitewash them with lime. And there you shall build an altar to the Lord your God, an altar of stones. You shall not use an iron tool on them. You shall build with whole stones the altar of the Lord your God, and offer burnt offerings on it to the Lord your God. You shall offer peace offerings, and shall eat there and rejoice before the Lord your God. And you shall write very plainly on the stones all of the words of this law. So like I said, there's a few things here that make me think that maybe this is a little different than the memorial that Joshua had him put up, but maybe not. Like I said, I think it could be either one. If it isn't the same, they're building a lot of memorials. And if it is, well, it just gives us a few more details about it, and kind of, the location being kind of generic, so it might have more than one place to describe it. That would make a lot of sense too. A couple of statements here. Stan makes the observation, Joshua himself set up a second memorial. One memorial would be carried into the land, and the other placed at their location. So again, it's kind of interesting to see how those memorials were split up and what they were accomplishing here. One thing is, this, we say, what was it that was written on the stones? George already told us, and that was the law. Now, again, that's a lot of stuff to write. And like George had pointed out, he said here that you shall write very plainly all the words of the law. So that's a, boy, I wish I could see that. Can you kind of see it in your mind, these white painted stones and perhaps very tiny script on it? That, just barely written, and they were just written over. And then what did they do with this altar? What did they do with this memorial? Yeah. Good one. Yeah, they turned it into an altar and they offered a sacrifice on it. So, I kind of think it's interesting as you're putting this burned sacrifice on it. What might happen to all the writing on it and such? I don't imagine it survived. I imagine that between the stones being burnt. So it's kind of a thing that's interesting. You can kind of see how this writing was symbolic. It wasn't as though this is where the law was going to be. This was the idea of God's law was the foundation of their sacrifice. God's law was the basis of everything that they had. And that really is what he's trying to tell them, that the words that God is giving you, that's what's going to get you through the land. So when they get there and they write the law on these rocks, and then they build this altar, this memorial that they're ultimately going to sacrifice on, that really is remarkable. And as I said, if it's the river rocks that they're pulling up, that they're bringing in there, it's even more symbolic. But even if it's not, it really is a remarkable thing to think about. Does anybody have any last thoughts? Please, Debbie.
Well, I thought it was kind of interesting that they used lime, because that is not a real durable material. I mean, even what we call whitewash is not a durable material. The weather just disintegrates it quickly. And so I just wondered why they would use something so undurable.
Well, it's interesting to me. I got an idea about some of what I want to come back and say, that it seems like to me this whole project wasn't meant to last very long. And I got a thought about that. And maybe just by saying it that way, you might kind of pick my brain and know where I'm going with this. But the idea is that the whole law of Moses isn't going to last very long until a sacrifice comes along and obliterates it. So I kind of see that might be some of the thing here that's going on. But honestly, I'm not really sure what to think of with lime on it, what that would look like. I just don't, I lack the experience to know too much about what this is. George, you have a comment too?
I was just going to say that, in studying Old Testament history past this point and looking at all he did for them, I think he's doing all these things in order he can do everything that he can do to keep them faithful.
Yeah. How many different ways could you have God tell you, you've got to obey my commandments? Yeah. Yeah, and you're carrying that big rock with all the law on it, how important this is, and like I said, if it is the very river rock, then that much more powerful to say that. So very interesting point. What else could God do? Go ahead, Lamar.
Just another thought. The first verse of chapter 5, maybe should have belonged. Kings in the other land heard about what happened, that their heart melted.
Yeah.
And if you combine that with what we read in chapter 3 and chapter 4, that the water would go to the banks. This isn't the dry season. This is the rainy season or the wet season when it's actually very full. So it's a sign to even the people of the land that God is with them.
That's really neat. One of the things I was thinking of, and I agree with you, I think that maybe that statement in chapter 5 might fit better, especially because it says when they heard about the river, that it says that's the thing that really terrified them. And it really is interesting to think about what these memorials would feel like to those that were against them. Got a couple of, go ahead, Teresa.
I was just thinking that we get accused oftentimes of not believing the Old Testament because we don't follow the Old Testament. But in actuality, we believe it more than most do because we understand the purpose of it and what it teaches us, whereas other denominations try to still follow some of it.
A great and terrible irony. One of many. I've often said that there's a lot of ironies like that of what Christians are accused of and what the truth of the matter is. But you're right. It is a sense that the true value of the Old Testament is lost on most of the world. You're absolutely right. Lisa had one last comment that was kind of interesting. She talked about maybe the idea is maybe the law is actually with this altar. Maybe it's getting burned into the stones. I hadn't thought about that. But boy, that would be interesting. If I don't know, does lime bake? I mean, does anybody have a better knowledge of it than I do? So,
Doesn't it break down the soil and stuff? So it breaks down the soil, it breaks down the rock.
yeah, that might be the key.
So
Oh, interesting.
the rock, it wouldn't break down where they put the writing.
Well, that could be really interesting. Anybody want to do an experiment this week? I'd like to see that, if it, Terry's observation, maybe it actually preserved the writing when it got heated up. I didn't think of that. That really could be it. Lisa could be, you and Lisa could be onto something here. I think we're at our time. Michael, are you going to give me the signal? Michael gave me the nod. So that means we're at our time, and we'll go ahead and wrap up here and pick up next week in chapter 5 and talk about the destruction of the city of Jericho. Thanks, some great comments and thoughts online and as well as here in person.